My name is B.V. Jagadish, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Cloud Track. Mark has been with HP for about a year or so, and he's primarily driving the OpenStack technologies at HP. In fact, he's one of the co-founders of the OpenStack movement. So prior to joining HP, he served as the GM and product development at Yahoo, and before that, actually, he was at Rackspace as well, and he was one of the main driving forces of OpenStack. And as you know, OpenStack is gaining a tremendous momentum in the market. And there is a lot of contribution that's being made from the general public as well. So this is a very, very interesting subject in the cloud space. So we have an absolute expert who will be sharing his views on where and the challenges associated with the cloud technologies, as well as the security issues associated with cloud. With that, Mark, are you ready? Please welcome Mark Interrante. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark.
Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to talking to you guys about cloud, about security, and about how I see some of the things evolving. So the first thing I want to talk about is really the promise of, let's see, I'm trying to get this thing to, next slide. I'm going to have to do next slide. Thank you, guys. So with cloud adoption accelerating, security is one of the things I really wanted to kind of blend our conversation around together today. Many of the security issues that we've been dealing with across the industry over the last 15, 20 years have now changed, they've been reconfigured, and there's a new dynamic that's going on around the way security threats expose themselves, the rapidity in which they happen, the dynamic nature of them, and the way you need to have a group respond and think about security as you're building cloud-native applications, whether you're an entrepreneur with a Series A startup, or whether you're a large company building complex hybrid applications. There's a number of things to think about. I'd like to talk to you guys about some of those core things. Because while we adopt cloud because of its time to market, its ability to generate significant innovation, where we are able to build and collapse infrastructure in such a powerful way. And that's really one of the reasons we started OpenStack. We realized that if we were going to be enabling an open hybrid cloud technology, then we had to do that in a community. And so that community is something that we're very proud of. In fact, our big summit in OpenStack is next week, and I'll be giving the keynote there. We expect 6,000 people to attend that. And so it's many, many developers, a very technical conference. And it's all about how do we enable companies to build private clouds, public clouds, and hybrid clouds using the kinds of technologies that they can contribute to, they can affect, and they can evolve towards their own specific needs. So as we look through the lens of enterprise computing, HP is seeing the adoption going through a number of phases. So right now, I think we're kind of in that the early majority phase of adoption, where the youngest companies were born there, they're born native in the cloud. But when you look at companies with a significant IT or technical infrastructure, what we see a very strong adoption going on in the enterprise organizations. About 7% or so of their overall kind of technology spend is going on. 7% of the adoption in enterprise projects. We see that accelerating quite significantly over the next couple of years. And by 2018, we think that 40% of very significant enterprises will have a big footprint in cloud technology. And that's where you've got to make sure that it's got the wide range of technical features and ease of use, training, educational materials, and you're trying to transform your application development teams and environment. And we're coming on this on the wave of other things that we've been doing as application developers over the last few years, from continuous integration and continuous delivery, being able to automate the QA process so we can deliver on a daily or multiple times a day basis, to being able to combine development and operations teams together so that you don't have the walls between the operations folks who are deploying and running the software to the actual software developers who actually understand it and can make real-time changes to it. So when you think about building a cloud versus just writing software on a cloud, so my teams for the last over 5 years have been building clouds. And my experience at Yahoo taught me the best way to build something like that is using the agile technologies, using continuous integration and continuous delivery. And so that's why I think all the major cloud developers are creating their own cloud software that deploys many, many times a day. Because what you want to do is you want to reduce the time to fix an issue. And that's the reason we care about deploying quickly. One, it's more cost effective. But two, when I find an issue, I get the brains, a few of us think about it, we solve the issue. We want that deployed in a matter of minutes. And we want that to roll forward into the fleet of thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of computers that we have. So that reduces the surface area of risk, whether it's a risk for error or risk of security. And this is it's very timely, actually. We had a big bug that happened just 2 days ago, the Venom bug. And one of the things I have to appreciate is that the bug, people are finding these security issues, are naming them very well. They've got a great marketing campaign. I think there's great best practices. Heartbleed was kind of one of the great examples of this. So, but what it did is it rallied everybody on the channels. We knew it was coming. Everybody started to reorient the way they were patching and basically trying to get things fixed. Kind of a goal as well within 12 hours. Many, many people are now fixing these within 24, and we're seeing a real strengthening of the cloud technology groups in a way that we just didn't see that a few years ago. So I kind of want to talk about some of the outside forces in the industry, and then kind of some of the inside forces, compare those, and then kind of move forward into what I think about where cloud security is going. So from the external point of view, what we see is that there's a tremendous amount of forces and tensions on the industries. And Mark Andreessen was saying kind of everybody's becoming a software business. And this is coming true faster than I think many people expected. We've got quotes from CEOs of airlines saying that, what I really have is a software business with wings. What I'm really doing is there's so much logistics, so much information processing and analytics going on that this is really the kind of core competency I have to have to run my airline. A modern jet, a 787, creates about 0.5 terabyte of data per flight around the dynamics, around the performance of the thousands of parts and interrelated things. And those things get downloaded into an infrastructure. They get processed by, sometimes the engines, of course, are owned by different people. So there's a complex set of interactions and interdependencies that have to happen to kind of create this and get this going. And just the thought of having what would have been an unimaginable amount of data, 0.5 terabyte per flight, it just kind of processing. This is why we've got the kind of technologies we're building right now. If you look at kind of older school technologies like Starbucks and airplanes, airline industries, they're growing quickly in this area. And then, of course, the new native companies, Nest or somebody like that, or Uber, where they're using digital technologies to rewire the business processes that underlying a lot of parts of the way we interact on a daily basis. The Internet of Things, and I know there's a couple of tracks on that later, is a fascinating subclass of what we're doing in cloud computing. You have billions and trillions of interaction messages happening, per day. You need to process that signal. You need to create information and patterns out of that and rise that up to the information processing level of the cloud. So just one more aspect about it. I was at the Cloud Foundry Summit, another one of our open source technologies, earlier in the week. And you're hearing insurance companies, you're hearing companies that are mainstream, very, very mainstream companies that are, actuarially oriented, focusing around and doubling and quadrupling their investment in rapid application software development and in analytics so they can become more powerful in the industry. And so it was very exciting to see kind of across that spectrum of companies from early adopters through people who've been classically mainstream adopters, really trying to look at how they can get competitive advantage very quickly. So kind of as I was talking earlier about the Internet of Things, the number of devices that we are going to be tracking at any one time is really becoming a bit mind-boggling. So most of our technology that we are kind of using inside a corporation had a whole set of assumptions about the way the world worked. You know, your firewalls, your corporate intranet, your corporate network assumed, you had one person who probably had a device. You probably had one device per person. You got a company of X thousand people. You got about X thousand devices. If you look at where we should be by 2020, the average person in kind of middle America is going to have about 13 odd devices that are connected. Just the number of devices, the number of things that are related to that, especially in professionals, what we're going to have is interconnected network technologies. And these are driving some of the biggest shifts since the internet, since we really put the internet together. So these legacy WANs are going to be 10 to 100 times more complex than they were. And CIOs believe that mobility and managing the complexity of this is one of the key challenges. When I talk to them, this is really where they're thinking. It's not really the Internet of Things for many of them, but it's like, how am I going to deal with the explosion of data sources, data location, when somebody leaves or when there's core data on my tablet or my phone? How do I deal with that kind of risk? And data risk is something we'll come to in a couple of minutes. So if you look at forces from the inside, things inside the company, there's a number of things that are happening kind of inside many of the organizations. So clearly probably the largest trend in application development and influence has been the rise of the developer class. 10 years ago, the decision-making for technologies, for databases, for any kind of thing resided in the directors or VPs of infrastructure or of IT. They might have resided in a senior architect, but that was it. These decisions were made at the more strategic or the higher parts of the organization, and those were then cascaded into the rest of the organization. That is completely turned upside down right now. They'll still validate the decision, but that decision has been vetted and has been discussed on internal bulletin boards, on internal systems for days and weeks about what do the developers want to do to enable the kind of productivity that they're trying to achieve. And that's a really huge shift in the conversation. So people aren't going in and saying, well, you're going to use this kind of database technology or this kind of firewall or this is what your development environment's going to look like. They're like, if that's it, I'm out of here. So that doesn't happen because you can't have all your application developers walk out the door because then other things happen. And you're trying to get more of them. So you have to build an environment where these people want to be and can thrive and be productive. So when I talk to CIOs, one of the key things they are deeply interested in, and part of their mission for probably the last couple of years and probably for the next 5, is how do I dramatically increase the application development velocity of my teams? I hear fewer and fewer people talking about how do I save 20%. They're like, I need to go twice as fast in the next 6 months. How do you do that? What have you done? What do you think about this? Let's have a conversation there. And it's a powerful flip because it's more towards innovation. It's more towards reducing time to experiment. Whether you've got a team that wants to do an experiment, they want to play with something, they want to explore something, they have the idea, they need to be able to start that experiment literally within an hour. They need to be whiteboarding and they need to be able to open up the environment and be able to start to create things. And that's part of what these internal developer classes are really trying to do. Because right now it takes them, at best, a day or two. And you're like, that's not bad. That's a lot better than it used to be back in the old days where it took 2 months to go get an environment. But look, in today's millennial developer generation, a day or two is just as bad as a month or two. It needs to be, I'm going to get a latte, There when I'm done, I am back. So they can go do the work. And they're getting they learned that they want to be able to deploy and develop all the time. So it's tools, technologies, and an attitude towards trying things small, integrating them in, and moving things forward. And part of that for them is a very egalitarian belief of, look, I'm going to build it, I'm going to deploy it, and I'm going to operate it, and if it's going sideways, I will go fix it. And so the teams have a holistic view. And those holistic views mean they've got to figure out how do they get their operational processes going, whatever they are, how do they get connected, how do they find systems that help them get alerted when there's an issue. And they want to become more 360-degree developers than you might have had in a previous set. So one part of this, and I won't go too long on this, is no matter how much the CIO is saying, I really need my forward-facing application development cloud now, they've got 90% of their budget-ish doing the thing, running the systems and evolving the systems that are production systems today. So those systems are upgraded on average about 4 times a year, but they're looking for how do they optimize that? How do they make that shift happen so they're able to free up more resources? Everybody's trying to take that 90% and make it 80. Because if it's 80, they just doubled their new application development budget. So that's where you're seeing a real, a bifurcation in the IT landscape in the larger companies, which is kind of leading to I think we skipped one. Okay. Which is leading towards the proliferation of shadow IT. And shadow IT being just like, how do I get this stuff done better, and faster? So kind of moving a little bit towards the security side. I mean, this 2014 was clearly the year of the breach. We've had such significant acceleration in security risks at the largest companies, and you're seeing people, C-level officers in companies, not at that company anymore because of some of these issues. So just absolutely huge. We saw this in HP starting around 2011. We saw an acceleration of the complexity and sophistication of attacks from a global nature. And we've seen that really come to a really heightened level in 2014. Everything from major vulnerabilities in core open source software like Heartbleed, Shellshock, and Poodle, some of the great branding of our friends for finding bugs. But some of these bugs had been in code for a decade or more. So one of the things the industry has recognized is that, the Venom bug was a virtual floppy disk driver. So the cloud just got rebooted this week because of a virtual floppy disk driver from well over a decade ago. And that was old even then, because I'm sure they just, with a legacy thing, I need a floppy disk driver. So there is an increased emphasis on staring at, scanning, and deeply investigating all pieces of the infrastructure that we're dependent upon. Because it's not always the most critical piece where the flaw is. It's the piece off to the side that nobody's been looking at, that half a person has been maintaining in a casual basis with earlier techniques, with no formal methods, with no kind of code reviews, and that code just kind of been sitting there ready to be exploited. So just the kind of talking about just some of the exposures that we've had here just in the last year or so. So as these companies, as we think about how do we evolve and make use of cloud computing, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You've got to figure out how within your world you create apps that can move, you understand the personally identifiable information, the security risks that you have, and you understand where and how to isolate the fleets of servers and systems you use so that your information is encrypted or is protected in the right way. And if you have an agile kind of oriented cloud team and you do not have somebody on that team who has a security mindset, that sounds like the next hire, because it's more common than you'd believe. And those things, when we look at, we've got security teams that work within HP. We consult and advise a lot of developers, a lot of developer teams. It's one of the first things we look for in our checklist of kind of how do I know this team is structured well? It's like, okay, who's in charge of security? And let's have a conversation. Let's do a whiteboard. And if it happens and it's good, you're like, okay, we're at least in the zone here. If they're like, we trust that we go, and I call it kind of compliance complacency. Well, I've done PCI, therefore I'm not exposed. How many of those companies up there do you think had PCI? I bet you all of them had PCI. All of them had passed I bet you all of them had passed a PCI audit. Those audits were really good. They paid a lot of money for them. They got a lot of good documentation. A lot of people felt really safe and secure at that point. And well, so one of the models that we use is we think of like a 360-degree view of security. So we look at security kind of in the cloud, where we're saying, what are the external technologies and solutions that allow you to secure your application and data in the cloud? We look at what's underneath the cloud, underneath the services that you're consuming. And this is really, for those cloud providers, this is really where those teams really focus all of their time in making sure the technologies that enable the cloud platforms are intrinsically secure, that there's a limited amount of trust. And the more complex financial institutions are very clear on this. If you talk to them, and I've had some good conversations recently, you have a conversation that says, well, I asked for a VM with an OS on it. How do I know there wasn't a man-in-the-middle attack between where the image was stored, the operating system image, and the VM that I got? Prove it to me. How does your technology show me that inside my own corporation, I haven't had a man-in-the-middle attack? It's like, that's a very good question. Let's talk about how you can do that kind of thing. And so the companies in these companies have vast networks. Sometimes people have got 10, 20,000, 30,000 developers. They need to be as secure internally. Their systems have got to resist threat and have auditability within themselves. Each subsystem has to be able to protect itself. Security across the cloud. So many people, almost everybody's running some type of hybrid application. It's either multi-DC, multi-cloud technology, bare metal versus cloud. How are you dealing with credentials? How are you dealing with information that's getting passed back and forth? How do you make sure that your window of vulnerability is short for keys that are living on a system? Things like that. And the security kind of from the cloud there are a whole bunch of security services that, whether it's web application firewalls, or whether it's key management systems that use actual hardware encryption, HSMs, these kinds of things really allow you to create applications that are more fundamentally secure, where you're not storing a key ever except in RAM and in a transitory basis with a timeout of 10 minutes or something. And it's always because you've got, in essence, a integration with a physical device that allows you to do kind of rapid and effective key management. So as we have people thinking about the intrinsically connected nature of the cloud applications they're building, I start to have conversations very rapidly with people around how do you get the requirements out early? How do you start to really step back? And because everybody wants to talk about the use cases and the functions and features. And then another set of people want to talk about the screens and the pixels and the bits and the colors. We need to do those. We need to get a third room. We need to get people talking about, let's go figure out how we're going to get hacked a day, a week after the system launches. And that's for a whole bunch of people, it's an unfun conversation. You need to find the people where it's a fun conversation. You need to get them in the room and give them pizzas. And you just say, tell us how we're going to die. And I use a technique called a pre-mortem. You guys probably do post-mortems all the time. We had a project. How did it go out? Why don't you do it in the beginning? You do it at the very beginning of a project. There's an article on this. You can go look it up. It's like, how did we die? Well, and you ask people that. It's a year and a half later, project has failed, we're dead. Bad things have happened. Well, what happened? And it's amazing. People go, oh, there's this, and there's a project you didn't do that. You make a great list of things that you didn't do. The good news is, your project just started. You can figure out how you want to address those concerns and risks. So, and part of that's engaging the right kind of people, figuring out what data is moving to and from your cloud, who's going to be using it, what's the potential impact of a breach, what's the worst thing that can happen if this breach happens, what's the threat vector, and what do you do with it? And figuring that out and trying to understand that really helps the team figure out where they actually want to invest the time. And like I said, compliance complacency is one of the things that I see so often. I am a big believer that I'm much more a threat-oriented person than a compliance-oriented person. You got to do compliance things for a lot of good reasons. Always look for what are the threat vectors underneath that. Compliance standards move very slowly. The rate of evolution of security risk in the last 12 months has been very significant. Finding people and working through where are the vectors of attack and figuring out how you're going to work and do that, I think, is a very, very important thing, because the number of threats are quite significant. These are some categories, whether it's breach data, people inside your system, shared technology vulnerabilities where there's a key or something that moves back and forth amongst them, denial of service attacks. If you've never had one, you don't want them. Good news is there's technologies to go figure out how not to have them happen, but if you just tell your network guys what happens when a 10 gigabits worth of random bad data starts flowing onto our website or our API, what do we do? Well, typically, if you haven't prepared for it, you melt. Your system goes offline instantaneously and you're down until somehow you can work with the networks that are providing your internet and get that information null routed. There's technology teams, there's probably some here out in the lobby that can help you guys understand how do you deal with denial of service attack protection. And you look at how much threat that causes you, but you'd rather know about what would you do first so you can go fix that. Some of these companies it's a tremendous amount of data, and it's all happening through a invisible network of zombie botnets with their PCs. So it's highly distributed. It's not possible to turn off. It is possible to redirect and attack and redirect that attack. And like, who is the attack? The attack ranges from script kiddies, which are just some junior person who goes and downloads some really cool bad stuff off a website, which directs a DDoS attack, all the way through very serious third parties, serious intelligence agencies, organized crime. It is a very sophisticated network that's going on right now, and it's evolved quite dramatically in the last few years. So just a little bit about what we're experiencing, just as a big corporation. You know, we've got, of course, billions of employee transactions on a daily basis. Almost 500,000 mailboxes. Over 63 petabytes worth of storage just in one of our major storage subsystem arrays, and on the order of over 1 million connected devices. So really the path to this begins with how do you work through hybrid applications and both their public or private cloud. And what we're seeing is people working through automation on the public side, on the non-virtualized side, freeing up resources so they can create and build more sophisticated applications and increasing their application development environment. But, hybrid's not immune. I said there's a whole set of attack vectors, and this is just an example of some of the kinds you have as a way to start to get people oriented around the kind of attacks you might actually have. The reason that HP and we are such big proponents of open source wherever possible and practical is, with enough eyeballs, every bug is shallow. What we find is the code is much better designed. We've got many more aspects that are reused and reusable, and the transparency is so much higher there. So there may be sloppy code that caused an issue, but you're just very assured that there's not backdoors that are maliciously put in, because they would have been found by, the dozens and dozens of reviews that people have. So maybe just a high level, just kind of, as I look at HP and HP research, we have a whole threat intelligence and security team, and we are trying to figure out how do we understand, support the kind of enterprise customers that need a sophisticated kind of security type research and security threat modeling. Whoops. Now I've got a bird. Okay. Well, listen, this has been a high-level overview of kind of my views on cloud computing and security, and maybe time for a question or two?
Yes, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
As the next session
Why don't you start setting it up for the next session, and while it gets set up and the panel speakers arrive. So let me ask you a couple of questions. Just at the time when everybody is trying to settle down and understand this whole hybrid cloud and private cloud and all of that stuff, right? Suddenly there is this talk about containers, right? That seems to be changing everything upside down, the way things are being done. Now, what's your take on that? What do you think, would be the impact in the enterprise IT, right, for those who are learning more about this container, and where do you think?
So I think containers have probably had the fastest uptick in interest of kind of any technology I've seen recently.
Yeah.
As a competitor, in some ways, to a virtual machine, it's lighter, simpler, and allows you to deploy many containers which are very specialized on a machine. What you see in Cloud Foundry are the open source paths that we contribute to. It uses Docker type containers, so we're using that in that area. And you see that applications, whether it's in the major kind of Azure or AWS or OpenStack clouds, they're all evolving and adapting to support container technology pretty rapidly. And you see that movement across the board. It's a great way to provide some isolation between the internal smaller services you have in your cloud. And as we're going to be talking later on today, security in containers is a lot lower than security in a VM. The technology is newer. I think it's less robust. The analogy that I use is, would you rather have a kind of a single family home, which has got a lot of isolation from your next home? Or do you want to, if you're in an apartment building, there's a lot more noise, there's a lot more kind of interconnection, and containers are much more like living in an apartment.
So this being an entrepreneurs conference, right, there's a lot of entrepreneurs here. What do you think are the opportunities for these entrepreneurs to build the next set of companies or solve the next set of problems in these areas?
So I think in the context of containers, I think there's a really growing ecosystem of people trying to figure out how do we, one, re-implement in a better way the kinds of things that people have come to expect in a virtualized world. So I think that for those people that are exploring the container technology ecosystem, I think there's a great set of analogies over the last decade of virtualization to keep playing out, understanding, and figuring out. So I would definitely, if I was doing a startup today, I think I'd probably be looking in that area.
Terrific. Mark, thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it. Please give a big hand.
Thank you.